Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish today on Sunday, the 8th of September. My name is Brian Liddy and today I'm joined by two guests. We've got Rona Mackay. Rona was a journalist for 20 years but is now the SNP MSP for Strathkelvin in Bearsden. And also we've got Hugh Marshall joining us from Wales. Hugh's the founder of Talking Wales. Good afternoon to both of you. Thank you for giving up a chunk of your weekend for us.
Hello.
Starting with Ukraine update, today is the 928th day of the war in Ukraine. Russian shelling has killed 5 people in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine on Saturday, officials said. Region Governor Vadim Filashkin said 3 people were killed and 4 injured in the town of Kostyantynivka, while 2 men in their 50s were reported killed in shelling near the town of Toretsk. Multiple Russian attack drones were intercepted by Kyiv's air defences overnight, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. 67 drones were launched over the country and 58 drones were shot down, with 3 more destroyed by electronic weapons systems, the Air Force said. No injuries or serious damage were reported. Funeral services have been held in the eastern Ukrainian city of Poltava for the victims of one of the deadliest Russian airstrikes since the invasion began, which killed over 50 people at a military training facility. As grieving families and local residents mourned, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pledged to boost domestic weapons production by creating underground facilities to withstand Russian missiles and drone strikes. He also renewed calls for the lifting of restrictions on using Western-supplied weapons against Russian territories, noting that Ukraine is also developing its own missiles to put pressure on Russia. 3 people were injured in Russia's Belgorod region after Ukrainian shells hit the town of Shibikino, according to the regional governor. And Ukraine says it had hit a Russian ammunition depot in a border region, according to the country's security services on Saturday. A large fire and several explosions were reported overnight in the Russian region of Voronezh, which borders Ukraine, prompting officials to evacuate locals living near the blaze. Western leaders should not be intimidated by Kremlin threats of nuclear escalation, the head of the CIA said on Saturday, amid a debate over whether Anglo-French Storm Shadow missiles should be used inside Russia. William Burns, on a visit to London alongside the head of MI6, said the US had brushed off a previous Russian nuclear scare in autumn 2022, demonstrating that threats from Moscow should not always be taken literally. The heads of MI6 and CIA also praised Ukraine's surprise incursion into Russia as an audacious achievement that could change the narrative of the war. The US State Department has announced that Secretary of State Antony Blinken will head to London on Monday and Tuesday to discuss the Middle East and Ukraine. Blinken will be the most senior US official to visit the UK since Labour won the general election in July. So that was quite a lengthy update. Rona, is there anything in there that you would maybe want to highlight?
Well, just the absolute, horror of war, and it's just astonishing. I think the death toll and the injuries, it almost becomes incomprehensible as the numbers go up and up. I mean, in Gaza, 41,000 Palestinians have been killed, 94,000 injured, and that's probably just an underestimate. Disproportionately, women and children are affected, as always in war, which is it's just heartbreaking. I mean, there's no other word for it. And we're now seeing the horrible prospect of polio coming back in Gaza, and UNRWA are scrambling around to vaccinate amongst all the horror and chaos. So I mean, I think when you hear about the Israeli Defence Force targeting schools, it just defies belief. That human beings can act like that, and as I say, the scale of misery in Ukraine and in Gaza just it doesn't compute in most people's minds. It's just awful. I think it is a massive problem, and the the Gaza Israeli war, I don't think people can see much light at the end of that tunnel right now. I don't think that there's certainly no easy answer. Anthony Blinken said this week that he was 90% certain that there would be a ceasefire deal struck. Netanyahu came back immediately and said, no, that wasn't the case. So I don't see any rational compromise coming there. And you just look on in horror and wonder, and think about all those people that are affected by it. It's just awful.
Yeah, thank you, Rona. Hugh, was there anything in today's update that caught your eye?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially in the last couple of weeks, the discussions around the long-term provision of arms to Ukraine. I think especially the German elections, there's clearly a sector of society in Germany who don't want to continue to fund Ukraine. Just on the basis that it's German taxpayers' money that could be spent on things in Germany. It is a minority, but it's a substantial one. I think it's interesting the fact that the Ukraine have been building their own capacity from a weapons perspective, which is allowing them to attack targets inside Russia. I think last week they attacked a power plant that was sort of north of Moscow. So they're going deep into Russian territory, and obviously they have long-range weapons, but they don't have the permission to use them. And I think there's going to be lots of a lot is hanging on the results of the presidential election in the States, which is happening in 2 months' time.
Thank you, Hugh. So we'll move on to the update in Gaza, which I've just misplaced. I'm really sorry. Oh, that's right. Forgive me. So at least 40,939 Palestinians have been killed, and 94,616 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, as UNRWA scrambles to vaccinate Gaza's children against polio. Israel continues the deadly attacks, killing 61 people, including 13 Palestinians sheltering in a school on Saturday. There are concerns that Israeli demands to retain control in Gaza are holding up the ceasefire agreement. I'll ask you first if there's anything that you'd like to say about the situation in Gaza.
Yeah, I think Rona touched on it in the previous piece. It's just incredibly depressing and sad that this is continuing to happen. We scroll through social media and we're just becoming immune now to the sight of mutilated children. It's incredible that we're allowing this to happen, and sadly, it all just comes down to one person, Netanyahu. Not forgetting, obviously, Hamas and the atrocities, they carried out, which was the sort of precursor to what's happening at the moment. But it seems to be sort of Netanyahu will do anything to hold on to power. The sooner Netanyahu is removed and hopefully gets some sort of sense into the top of the Israeli government, then that's where hope will come from. But we also need to make sure that the Palestinians moving forward, that they have representation that actually works for the benefit of Palestinians, and Hamas clearly isn't that organisation.
Thank you, Hugh. So the next item today is Grenfell. So Sir Martin Mobrick published his Grenfell report this week, It had 1,700 pages and talked about 72 official deaths started by a faulty fridge freezer. I often think that there's probably more than 72 deaths, but that's the official figure. There's talk that in the report that the cladding was put in place to make the view nicer from more upmarket environs around. The fire started at 12:50 in the morning, but by 6 a.m, and people had been contacting, texting friends and relatives and making phone conversations. By 6 o'clock in the morning, all those conversations had stopped. Residents knew that it was probably that it could happen, that there was a risk of fire. They'd actually flagged it up for months beforehand. And Kensington and Chelsea Council is one of the richest councils in the country. I suppose for me the one big takeaway from the report is that it concluded that every single death was avoidable. So Rona, have you had a chance to look at the report?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it was a very good report. I think it was it didn't pull its punches, and it laid bare just the horror of you know. I think, as you said there, Brian, the fact that the report said that the deaths were avoidable, it's unimaginable for families to feel. I don't know how they felt this week when it's bad enough, obviously losing a loved one in a tragic accident, but to hear that it was unavoidable, I think is it must have been just so hard to take. As I say, the report was very frank about the culpability and the number of people who must take some of the blame for this. The word greed was used in his summation, which I liked because a lot of it's to do with greed and saving money. And yeah, just a good report on something that should not have happened, and I really do hope that lessons have been learned for it, because that's the only legacy that this should ever have.
Thank you, Rona. And it just occurred to me, did I neglect to ask you about Gaza? Or
No, it's fine. I'd spoken about Gaza at the start. It's fine. Don't worry, Brian. No, it's absolutely
okay,
fine.
okay, thank you. I
Um,
suppose on you go.
Yeah, I was just going to go on to talk a wee bit about the sort of building regulation side of it. And we in the Scottish Government passed the Housing Cladding and Remediation Bill in May of this year, which basically means that developers cannot use this material in high rises. I think it's over 11 metres, but I mean, I wouldn't expect any developer now to be using that stuff in any development at all. Um, it's basically, it prohibits combustible material like that being used, and it speaks to a whole lot of things of, almost deregulation of the construction industry, which allowed this to happen. And we need to get back on track and make safety the first priority whenever buildings are, or anything is being constructed. The government will engage with developers to make sure that this happens. And I think, as I say, if no good really can come of it, except it's just shone a light on the shoddy practices and the cost cutting way that buildings were put up, and been put up over the past 20 or 30 years. And really, it's a very hard lesson, a very hard price to pay.
Thank you, Rona. Hugh, what's the situation in Wales? Is cladding a problem? As big a problem in Wales as it is elsewhere?
It is a problem. It's not a huge problem, and again, it's a reminder that this legislation and the report is relevant to England and Wales. It's one of those things that doesn't have devolved competency in Wales. Obviously, within Wales, we've got a much smaller population, and we have far fewer high-rise buildings. But there is a group called the Welsh Gladiators who've been sort of very active in this space since Grenfell, and they've, yeah, So so the situation in Wales isn't as serious just because of the lack of tall buildings. We don't have many high-rise buildings. But again, there are buildings in Wales, and there are huge issues with getting Welsh Government, along with the Westminster Government, to act on that. So the other thing with this is just the fact that with criminal convictions, for what happened at Grenfell, it's unlikely that those cases are going to be heard until the end of 2026. And that's just too long a time. And there's 87, I think, different companies and people who are involved with being investigated, and it's incredibly sad. And the fact that these things take so long, that's the other thing, is there must be a way of speeding up these investigations and inquiries.
Thanks, you. You talked about prosecutions, and there haven't been any prosecutions after similar inquiries, things like Piper Alpha and Hillsborough. So I wonder if that's going to be a continuing trend. Rona, you mentioned deregulation, and which makes me think of Brexit, when they said they were going to get rid of all the red tape. But red tape quite very often is regulations are there to protect us. It's standards, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And when it comes to people's safety, public safety, then it should never be cutting corners. I mean, I have in my own constituency, our town hall was built in the past, I can't remember, it's probably 8 to 10 years, and it's now completely cordoned off and out of action because some of the material was used in that. So the community's having to do other things. Also, some schools have been affected as well. So I really do think it shines a light on just poor practice, and hopefully, that we'll see things change now. But as Hugh says, I mean, 7 years for this inquiry is just, I know it's a huge report, but 7 years to get to this point is just terrible, and it's just must be awful for the victims' families.
Thank you, Rona. Hugh, you said that there was less high-rises in Wales. Glasgow famously put up lots of high-rise flats in the 1960s when they redeveloped areas like the Gorbals. But a lot of them have come down recently, and they've been replaced by sort of modern versions of the traditional tenement format, Scottish tenement format. That was going to lead to something, but oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there was a fire in a block of flats in Irvine in the west coast of Scotland a good number of years ago, and after that, the Scottish government sort of tightened up the standards, and that I think that's why there's a difference between standards in Scotland and England and maybe Wales as well.
Yeah, and I think there's been a similar trend here in Wales. Is those concrete monstrosities, as some of us call them, but some people love them. A lot of them have been taken down and replaced with sort of social housing. I think that the big concern, especially in places like Cardiff, in the capital, is just the number of student accommodation that's going up, and those are your sort of high rises that would be sort of clad. And again, you can imagine if it's student accommodation, making sure that corners aren't being cut. But hopefully that will be the case. But I think it's going to come to a point now where in somewhere like Cardiff that there's going to be too much sort of student accommodation and not enough accommodation for people. So it is clearly something that needs to be looked at in future.
Thank you, Hugh. I think I'll move on to the next item. We're ahead of time. So when the Scottish Parliament returned from recess on Tuesday, the Finance Secretary, Shona Robertson, made a statement outlining cuts to the current year's Scottish budget due to uncertainty in the amount that the Scottish Government is going to receive from Barnett consequentials. There was announcement that, sorry, that's something else. So, forgive me, Hugh. No, it's Rona. Rona. I'm so sorry. I told you that
That's fine.
I
That's fine.
was like this.
That's
Um,
fine.
so I wonder if you were in the chamber when there were debates and these announcements were made. Can you give us any sense of what it was like?
Yes, I was in the chamber. We all were, and a sense of frustration and, frankly, anger, because when Labour were elected, well, prior to the election, all we heard was change. This is going to be change for this, change for that. Now we're discovering it's not change for the better, and the people are thinking, well, what on earth is going on here? Because Keir Starmer taking a very hard line down there and talking about the financial black hole that they inherited. Um, when we tackled politicians prior to the election about that, the leader of the opposition, Anna Sarwar, said there would be no more austerity, no more cuts. There wasn't a £20 billion black hole. And that's had an effect up here, and Labour did very well in the election up here, and I think they must now be feeling. Most people will now be thinking, "What on earth is going on here?" Because whatever austerity uh, the UK government brings in has an effect on us. And the last thing that the finance secretary wanted to do was announce drastic cuts, because I mean, who does want to do that? We shouldn't have to do that. And that is what happened on Tuesday. We have to be very, very careful, because I think, as your listeners know, that we have to balance the budget. We don't have an option. We can't have credit. We can't borrow. We have to balance the budget. So it was a very difficult budget for the finance secretary to, or a very difficult announcement rather for the finance secretary to make. But it's something that had to be done, and it's a lot of it's to do with the uncertainty, as you said earlier, about what we're going to have in Barnett consequentials. Very hard to deal with your finances when you are reliant on another country stroke government giving you money and you don't know what it is. So basically, I think the bottom line is that Labour and Keir Starmer appear to have just been following the Tory austerity policies, and he's trying to get all the bad news out of the way at once. And the bad news being the scrapping the winter fuel for allowance for older people, and the energy prices going up, which he said would not happen. Energy prices, we're all going to be paying more. So I think people are starting to think, what on earth is going on here? Certainly very, very difficult for the Scottish Government to make good out of this, and to try and stick to the plan that we have for helping Scotland to grow the economy and to make it a fairer society. It's very, very hard, but we'll be doing it against all the odds.
Thank you, Rona. And so it was a cut to winter fuel payments that was made, and I'll stay with you, Rona. And Douglas Ross used the Scottish Fiscal Commission report to accuse the Scottish Government of its own policies were to blame for these cuts by the Scottish Government. But when you look into the Scottish Fiscal Commission's report, it actually says that it's because the Scottish Government has been spending money on public sector payments and is it disability payments for social security for people with disabilities. So these are actually good things to be spending money on, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Douglas Ross would say that. That's all I can say. That's not surprising. He says stuff like that, but it's absolutely right. I mean, these are pay deals, which we have to make them, to avoid strikes, and also to give people a decent standard of living, and to improve the pay which has been slowly just getting eroded over the past 14 years of Tory austerity. And as for the disability payments, and I mean, surely any right-minded person would think that has to be done. So, absolute nonsense as usual coming from Douglas Ross and the Tories, and they have their own problems, and look where they are now. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rona. And Hugh, I'm just wondering, if is there similar discussions going on in the Senate?
Yeah, because it's interesting how the timing in Scotland is different to that in Wales, because the budget for next year will be sort of discussed it's usually in December, but previously, because there was a 10% cut in budgets in Wales a year ago, because the Welsh Labour government hadn't factored in inflation, apparently. So yeah, so I think health and education were ring fenced, so the savings had to come from other areas. And seeing as the majority of the budget, over 70%, is health and education, and it was quite sort of swinging cuts in other areas. But I've been fascinated by the sort of the narrative around this from Scottish Labour, sort of pointing, saying that that this is SNP to blame, where in reality services in Scotland are performing far better than they are in Wales under a Labour-run government. So it's
Yeah.
this pointing finger at the SNP, the SNP bad, sort of thing, but without recognising that the situation in Wales in many areas, are far worse under a Labour government, and there is an element of hypocrisy there. And I think there needs to be, I think, in Wales and Scotland, a greater understanding of how devolved government works, and also how the devolved government works in Scotland and Wales in relation to each other. And I think that's why, having these conversations and coming on here is really beneficial, because, it allows me to learn more about what's going on in Scotland, but hopefully you get a picture of what's happening in Wales as well, because obviously in Scotland you have greater levers when it comes to sort of tax raising powers, and greater responsibilities when it comes to things like policing and the legal system, whereas in Wales sort of our devolution is more limited. And what was interesting, prior to the general election, we've had a convention in Wales, that has discussed, the options moving forward for Wales, which looked at, sort of more devolution, and also, independence, discussing everything in an open way. And lots of those things that the convention came up with were supported by the Labour government in Wales. But now that the Labour government is in Westminster, they're now sort of being put on the back burner. So, for example, there's been a call for devolution of justice and policing to Wales. What Labour were offering in their manifesto is to consider devolving elements of youth justice. So it is this thing of saying, "Oh, we're going to change things," and when people in Wales and the Labour Party in Wales say, "Yes, we want to change these things," they're actually then being stopped by previously by a Conservative government in Westminster, but now they're being stopped by a Labour government. So it's going to be interesting times for the next, the election in 2026, because they won't be able to point the finger at Westminster for blame.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think it will happen in Scotland.
Yeah.
We always value your opinion from Wales, Hugh, and I've heard people saying that it'll be a lot better for Wales to have two Labour governments, one in Westminster and one in the Senate, and people are looking forward to 2026 up here, and saying, some people are saying the same thing up here, that it's going to be a lot better with a Labour, with Anna Sarwar in Holyrood and Swinney in Westminster. But I don't know if everybody agrees with that. Rona, I see you shaking your head.
No, absolutely not. I mean, Hugh encapsulated, the scenario that we have, with Scottish Labour saying one thing and can only do what their English paymasters allow them to do. So, I mean, they are in a tricky situation in that sense, because they now have to defend, what's happening, and so far they're not making a very good job of it. The Parliament this year celebrates its 25th. Sorry, this month celebrates its 25th anniversary. And what we're seeing is a sort of a threat to our devolved powers. And, rather than, yes, we have gained new powers over the last quarter of a century, still, still woefully inadequate, but um, we're actually seeing this sort of attempted erosion of those powers. Ian Murray, the Scottish secretary, has announced that he's got a pot of money that he's going to be giving out to councils, and he can decide what's going to happen to them, etc., which is in complete contravention of the Seoul Convention and the Scotland Act. And be interesting to see whether that happens. But these are the sort of threats and the things that are bubbling under the surface, which makes us very uneasy. But while we're in power, we will do everything in our power to protect the Scottish Parliament and to increase the powers that it has, because we just can't have our devolved powers being eroded like this. And I think exactly as you said, I mean, it's just going to be interesting to see how they now react when they don't have the Tories to blame. Of course, they'll still blame them and they'll blame us, but at the same time, the actions of Keir Starmer and his government are going to impact hugely, are already impacting hugely in Scotland, even within 2 months of the election. So it's going to be an interesting year or two, just to see how all that pans out, because it's frankly, they've got off to a very brutal start, and people are beginning to say, what on earth is going on here? Did we actually elect a Labour government? Because they seem to be carrying on the same. Well, they certainly are carrying on the Tory austerity and using their sort of fiscal policies. And I wouldn't have thought, as a former member of the Labour Party many decades ago, I would never have thought that would happen. And it's sad to see it happen, because I feel like they've thrown all their principles out, and that's not what the Labour Party was founded to do. But we are where we are now.
Thanks, Rona. Hugh, I promise I will try and get back to you before we run out of time. But Rona, I have heard criticisms of the Scottish Government to say that perhaps instead of the £500 million in cuts that Shona Robeson announced, that maybe they could have council and land tax reform, and also maybe property tax reform. And the Scottish Greens have been saying that they agree that you could ditch the small business bonus scheme, because apparently there's a report came out that said that there wasn't really very much tangible benefit from it. But I think some of those things were discussed in conference recently, because we covered conference. So again, I'm guessing that you were at conference. Is there anything that do you think this is going to be realised?
Well, land reform and tax has always been on the agenda. It's obviously areas that, I mean, I think radical revision of all these things now has to be done, if we are to to progress and create the society that we want. So I mean, yes, I agree with all of that, and we need to start doing it. But our immediate problem is trying to keep the people of Scotland, trying to protect them as much as we can. And don't forget, we mitigate. I don't have the figure in my head at the moment, but millions upon millions of our money is spent mitigating UK policies and benefit cuts. Yes, it's a lot. It's an eye-watering sum that we could use here in a much better way than having to mitigate the bedroom tax, etc. And remember, this Labour government refusing to scrap the two-child benefit, two-child cap. We've introduced the child benefit, which is a game changer, lifting 100,000 estimated children out of poverty. Families, the Action Group Against Poverty has said that families will be £28,000 better off by the time their child reaches 18 and everything. So we've managed to do that despite the drastic cuts in our budget and the uncertain consequentials that we're getting. So it's kind of a tale of two nations in a way, and we are keeping our head above water. But I think, I mean, there are things that we need to examine. If they're not working, they need to be re-looked at, and I'm sure we'll be doing that. But the big picture right now is just trying to and trying not to have this austerity affect families any more than it already has done. And the use of food banks and the poverty that still exists is just unacceptable in a country which, in our country and in Wales, could be very, very successful and flourish.
Thank you, Rona. And Hugh, I'm always intrigued as to whether certain things in the news up here make it land in Wales. So recently, this week, Anas Sarwar was given a nickname Austerity Anas, after it emerged that he had backed £30 billion of Tory cuts while he was an MP. I keep forgetting that he used to be an MP. He was among 198 Labour MPs who backed Tory spending plans which imposed strict caps on welfare spending during a vote in 2015. But yeah, so does that ever make it to the news in Wales? Have you heard that before?
No, I hadn't heard that until now. So again, and this shows you the importance where we have a UK media that basically broadcasts from London and its satellites. But again, what you find that news in Wales, it doesn't go the other way. Sort of do people in England understand what's going on in Wales from a devolved perspective? I don't think they do. And I think this general misunderstanding, things, because obviously, I got sympathy. I have actually got sympathy for the Welsh Labour government, because same as the SNP, they're restricted in what they can do based on the money that they're given. And that's the thing. People don't realise that, in Scotland and in Wales, that the devolved governments are basically administering on behalf of Westminster in certain areas, particularly health and education. And it's in Wales. I think that the danger is in 2026. The latest opinion polling has Labour, I think, only 1 point ahead of Plaid Cymru. So it's the closest Plaid Cymru have been to Labour. I think Labour were on 26 and Plaid were on 25. But what was also disturbing was the percentage that were going to vote Reform. So obviously Reform offer nothing, absolutely nothing. In fact, they offer a negative, because they will send representatives to the Senedd, as they did when UKIP had members when it was the Assembly, and they will do nothing. They won't contribute anything. They'll take money out of the system and use that money to fund, sort of shady think tanks that are actually working against the interests of Wales. So, and that's the danger, where in 2026, where, we will have more Senedd members. We'll have 96 instead of the current 60. But what we need more sort of Senedd members, but we need better Senedd members as well, so we can have that scrutiny and do the work of government better and be able to take on more devolved responsibilities. So increasing that number, but having a dozen or more Reform representatives isn't going to be benefit. Actually, it's going to be detrimental, because they'll just hold things up and they'll just spoil things, and that's the concern. I think my concern is that devolution is under threat, because for me currently it doesn't work, because the levers aren't there to actually make changes to people's lives. I think it does happen more in Scotland because of those advanced sort of financial levers, but in Wales there is a real danger that devolution is being seen as a failed project.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. It does sound like that could be proper levelling up, wouldn't it, if all the devolved governments, parliaments had the same powers? And there is concerns up here that there's going to be Reform MSPs after 2026. But I'll move on to the next item, which is John Swinney announced his first programme for government as First Minister on Wednesday. He's eradicating child poverty, building prosperity, improving public services and protecting the planet will be his top priorities, or the top priorities of his government, is what he's pledged. Hugh, I mean, I would usually come to you first, but Rona, again, as you're an SNP MSP, is there anything that you can tell us more about that?
Really, I mean, the priorities the First Minister has outlined is the way that our party think and we know that eradicating child poverty is right at the top of that agenda. Even in private meetings before the announcements was made, we knew that John Swinney has always said that's his overriding mission, to eradicate child poverty. But that's linked to so many other things which are affected by austerity, frankly. Housing, health, poverty, of course, is a horrible health hazard to everybody, and social security benefits, everything like that has an impact on eradicating child poverty. And you know, uh, without labouring the point, we have the child benefit, we have the baby box, we've got a great early years, free education, early years, and we will be building on all of those things over the remainder of the session. And we've pledged another 3 billion to go into all of these things to try and eradicate child poverty, because there isn't one single factor that creates it. But the First Minister is absolutely clear that is his mission. In 2024, we shouldn't have so many children going to school hungry and coming home with nothing, no food on the table, not able to buy winter coats and all the rest of it. It's just nonsense, and it's about political choices that are made that are beyond our control, and we are determined to do something about it. And so the programme for government was a what I think most of us as members and supporters had expected, and we were very, very pleased that those lines have been taken, because the four areas that you talked about are the areas that you need to make progress and to have a better society.
Thank you, Rona. Hugh, some of the other points that were part of the programme for government included ensuring the NHS has resources it needs, and there's talk about delivering around 20,000 extra orthopaedic, ophthalmology and general surgery procedures annually in Scotland's new treatment centres. He wants to make Scotland more attractive for investment, and he wants faster planning decisions for renewable energy schemes. Is there similar, again, the Senate, there must be a similar programme for government?
Yeah, what's quite interesting is that the most recent programme for government was based on a cooperation agreement between Labour and Plaid Cymru. And that has come to an end because Plaid Cymru withdrew from that because of the Vaughan Gething scandal. People might remember Vaughan Gething became First Minister having taken a donation of £200,000 for his campaign to become First Minister from a convicted environmental somebody who's convicted of environmental offences. He then had to stand down after pressure from within the Labour Party, and he's actually announced last night that he won't be standing for re-election in 2026. So clearly, with the new Welsh government under Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, who will be announcing a new cabinet next week, he hasn't been offered a position in cabinet or something lesser. But the one thing that stood out for me was, as part of the cooperation agreement, was the introduction of free school meals for all junior school children in Wales, and there was one thing that came out in the media here was the bashing of the SNP in Scotland for not putting in place the free school meals for in Scotland in the same way, with Labour in Scotland saying, look what we've done in Wales. The fact is, it's only happened in Wales because Plaid Cymru put it in the cooperation agreement. Labour in Wales actually voted against that policy when Plaid Cymru proposed it previously. So again, it's this double standards of saying, one thing, criticising the SNP for not doing something, while praising, the Labour Party when they're actually not. They're not actually, they weren't actually, they've enacted it, but they weren't actually responsible for that policy. So I think again, it's frustrating when you have a sort of, talking about Rona was talking about poverty. remember we've had 25 years of Labour government in Wales, and almost 1 in 3 children in Wales are in poverty, whereas in Scotland, under the SNP, it's 1 in 4. So, why aren't we having that discussion about that difference? Why are so many more children in Wales under a Labour-run government in poverty compared to Scotland?
Thank you, Hugh.
Yeah, can I just say, Brian, just at the back of what Hugh was saying there, Hugh's mentioned the media a couple of times, and I just wanted to highlight that side of it. We've had a complete onslaught of SNP bad since before the election, and it's carrying on now, and quite often blatant misreporting. And the school meals one was an example of that. I mean, the First Minister announced in the programme for government that preschool meals are available, but for primary 6 and 7 they will be means tested, and that was the only, but they're still available for those who need it and are on benefits. It was reported up here that we had scrapped free school meals entirely, and that's just inaccurate and shoddy. But we see this over a host of policy areas. We've just been completely and utterly misrepresented. Now, we've never had a good mainstream press. We've won elections for the past. We've been in government for 17 years, despite all that, and we recognise that. But it's now got to the point where it's quite blatant, and it's. And what do you do about it? People, our supporters will say, why don't we get our good news out more often? And we say, well, we can't force mainstream media to report all of that. We make good use of social media, obviously, but that's just a certain element of the media. But yeah, it's a huge problem, and we are just going to have to power through it, because it's now become quite extreme.
Thank you, Rona, for making that point. It's good. Yeah, but yeah, excellent. So the next item is Westminster voted on GB Energy this week, and now there are reports that a growing Labour backbench revolt against the cuts to pensioners' winter fuel payment might happen. So the Labour government has confirmed that there will be a binding vote on whether to axe winter fuel allowances for all but the poorest pensioners. But Ed Balls said that he thought the government needed an escape route from the policy and described it as a mess. And in a sign of unrest, in a parliamentary party, a number of Labour MPs have signed an early day motion asking for the change to be reconsidered and given more time to be communicated. Hugh, this also comes on the back of the news that in Ireland, Electric Ireland is to cut electricity and gas prices from November. This will see the equivalent of an average of saving of €101 on an annual residential electricity bill from the 1st of October. And it's the third reduction by Electric Ireland in 12 months. What do you think is going to happen in Westminster next week?
Well, I think it's interesting that an independent country like Ireland within the EU are able to do these kind of things, whereas in Wales and Scotland we're limited as to what we can do because we're part of that Westminster framework. GB Energy, when you think about it, because we had Keir Starmer in Wales last week looking at sort of potential tidal floating offshore wind farms. So the big benefit in Wales is that there's potentially one of the best locations for a floating offshore wind farm is off the southwest of Wales, which is great news for generating energy. Wales already generates enough energy to supply Wales, so any extra energy will be to supply the UK, or in other words, England, where 84% of the population live. So the whole point of GB Energy is to generate energy to improve, to make sort of England basically less reliant on imported energy, and especially gas. So there's a lot of sort of smoke and mirrors going on here. And the other thing is obviously in Scotland. If that was happening in Scotland, then you would get a benefit because the Crown estate is devolved in Scotland. In Wales, any revenues that are raised from that offshore floating wind farm, because obviously the king owns the seabed, goes to the Crown Estate and goes to Westminster. So we don't get the benefits from that either. But I think, there is a lot of politicking here. GB Energy was a big part of, we will place it in Scotland. We'll use this to replace the jobs that potentially will go from the oil industry that has, been so influential in Scotland over the years. And it is, the cynic in me just sees it as a political ploy to try and fool people in Wales and Scotland that, oh yeah, you'll get some jobs, whatever. But is it going to reduce our bills? No, it isn't.
Thanks, Hugh. And the seabed, you mentioned that's a reference to ScotWind here in Scotland, which is, I don't know about controversial, but it's certainly got critics about how the sale of the seabed around Scotland was handled by the Scottish government. And of course, Shona Robinson's just raided what was in the ScotWind funds to plug the gap, and as you say, Rona, to balance the budgets. But Rona, I'm always intrigued. Have you heard any news about this from your colleagues, your SNP MP colleagues in Westminster, about the vote next week?
Tuesday's vote. Well, I think it's going to be really interesting because it's probably going to be the first test of Keir Starmer's authority, and I expect there will be rebels on the Labour side, and I know that our group will not be voting for it. So I mean, but I mean, I don't have more of an inside track really than that. In that, it will be very interesting to watch how Labour MPs can condone cuts, to pensioners, and it's always just everybody should remember that large proportion of our residents here in Scotland live in the coldest part of the United Kingdom, and I mean their bills are sky high already, and a lot of them now will fall under the threshold to get that extra payment, which will put them in extreme hardship. So yes, it's going to be quite fascinating to see how that goes and the extent of the rebellion. And I think there will be a rebellion.
And how will the SNP MPs vote? Do you know?
Well, they'll not support the cuts. I mean, that's that's not what we do, and we couldn't climb on board with this one. That's for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just come back? Because the one point I think, and I think Rona touched on it there, is statistically, the average temperature in Wales during winter is somewhere between 5 and 7 degrees. In Scotland, it's between 4 and 5. It may not sound like a lot, but it's a hell of a difference. So this is directly having an impact on pensioners in Scotland disproportionately from the rest of Wales and the south of England, and that the fact that they're not factoring that in, the geography and topography of the UK is criminal.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. I mean, just before we came on, we were kind of chatting about how the summer had gone, and I was criticised for saying that I thought that the Scottish summer hadn't gone too badly, but I was thinking for me it hasn't been overly wet and windy, and also we haven't had any more sort of breaking of the hottest records on temperature. I think it's been a bit mixed, but it's not been too bad. But you're right, Hugh. I mean, certainly there've been a few times up here when I've certainly contemplated putting on the central heating, but instead I've just put on an extra jumper instead. So heaven knows how it'll be once winter does kick in, and for pensioners that are going to be struggling. I don't know if there's anything else that you maybe want to add, Rona, before we leave that topic. Or
No, I mean, I just think warm homes should be they're a human right. We shouldn't have to heat or eat and all this sort of stuff. It's just the absolute last thing you would want to cut. And again, it's about political choices, and I think it's the wrong choice.
Okay, thank you. So the final item is that a tiny group of, well, maybe not tiny, a small group of fascists in Glasgow were met by thousands of peaceful anti-fascist campaigners who told them they were not welcome in Scotland. And Police Scotland confirmed that a 40-year-old man was arrested for a hate crime at a rally in Glasgow yesterday, a pro-UK rally promoted by Tommy Robinson, was held in George Square, while a counter-protest arranged by Stand Up to Racism was attended by thousands. Around 2,000 anti-racism activists gathered in the city centre, while a few hundred far-right activists also attended. Police Scotland confirmed a 40-year-old man had been arrested for a hate crime while carrying, and another fellow was carrying an offensive weapon. Rona, I don't know, I wouldn't expect you to have attended the rally in Glasgow, but what do you think?
Well, I'm a Glaswegian, and I couldn't make it yesterday for different reasons. I would have been there, and I actually very proud that the racists were told, and the right wing were told, you're just not welcome here, because it's not, that's just not our city. And I thought it was a really great display of people saying, don't bring your poison here because we do not want it. I mean, I'm still shocked with the fact that, say, 150 right wing people turned up. I didn't even think we had that in Glasgow, but we apparently do. And but the fact that they were so out, yeah, but well, the fact that they were so outnumbered, they may well have been bussing people in to boost their numbers or whatever. But the point is, they were told in no uncertain terms, don't start your nonsense here. So I was absolutely delighted, always proud to be a Glaswegian, and even more so yesterday. And by the way, I thought the police did an excellent job of just keeping it calm. So yeah, that was excellent.
Thank you, Rona. And Hugh, I'm worried that I'm asking you the same question all the time. I wonder if this made the news in Wales, but also, maybe more importantly, is there something similar happening in places like Cardiff?
It did make the news here, or I say news that on social media it was clear, and there were lots of images there confirming what you've said about the numbers. I'm sure we've all seen the clip of the middle-aged bald man sticking up his middle finger. So the arguments that these people have tend to be sort of limited, if I can say that. There have been certain things happening in Wales to a far lesser extent, but again, when it does happen, they're greatly outnumbered. I think Wales is similar to Scotland in that way, that we won't tolerate it. Although sadly, I think there are groups of people out there who are sort of falling for the it's immigration that is causing your life to be rubbish, where in reality it's Westminster economic policy that's behind it.
Yeah. Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Rona. I think that's we've reached the end of the hour, but I really appreciate your time and your thoughts as well on all these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
No, you're
Thank you.
welcome.
Dale.
No, thank you, Hugh, and thank you for your patience with me as well, as I'm struggling to get a sentence together. So that's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. And right now we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we tend to only receive donations of about £2,500 a month. So please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you once again to our guests, to Rona and to Hugh, and we'll see you later on this week with Scotland at 7. Goodbye.